或者請大家
Okay. Okay, first of all, thank you for attending. We have government officials. We now ask deputations to speak. Each individual will be given 3 minutes. Your submissions and verbal submissions do not enjoy legislative power and privileges. Cap 382 protection and exemptions. So now, Mr. Choi Jong-ho. I'm on the members' interest panel, and we have discussed whether we need to relax or have any amendments to our interests. Mr. Lui Man-wai, the speaker 145, he's a consultant. He also presented a paper. His document 112312/13 he supports the government projects, and as an important consultant, if all projects are endorsed, I understand that this consultant company is very likely to submit tenders to these environmental assessment projects. Chairman, the Hong Kong public or environmental groups always question when government recruits consultants, it's a question of neutrality. So this individual, should he declare interest, or should he have to elaborate what is his company's stance? Does he have any conflict of interest? Thank you, Mr. Fan. My view is very simple. Those attending, they will state they represent a certain company, a certain organization. It's very clear. If they're speaking as an individual, I'm aware that they also state which profession they are from. So today we'd like to hear different views, and some are affected groups, affected parties, affected districts. All this is very clear. Let's start. When he speaks, does he need to give a brief disclaimer? Mr. Fan, you've seen his written submission, and when we ask him to speak, he will state which company he represents. It's very clear. So let me invite Mr. Lei Zigong. A lot of big cities will generate waste material, and we estimate that construction waste will saturate by 2015-2016. But without landfills, how will we deal with construction waste? But if this residual material is used in Hong Kong, the cost would be lower than shipping it to Taisan, and it's more environmental friendly. Up till March 2013, we have filled up some 400 hectares in Taisan. It's equivalent to some 20-odd Victoria parks. So shipping Hong Kong construction waste to Taisan, the cost and carbon footprint is very large. So it is questionable on whether this is sustainable. Sending material to other areas, is this appropriate and ethical? I'd like you to consider that. Actually, reclamation technology is much improved compared to the past. So I think the impact will be very minimal. Thank you. Thank you. Next. Mr. Ho. Thank you, Chairman. Each time when the government says it has to reclaim land, it's because of population growth and they need to reclaim land. Decades ago, the government said we had the practice of reclaiming land, but in this generation, can we continuously reclaim land? Shouldn't we question whether our needs override other animal rights and survival rights? Prior to 1997, there was a rose garden in West Kowloon, and the plan was to reduce the population density in Yaojinwang. But what happened? There was a lot of land, and we see a lot of luxury residential developments in West Kowloon. So there was no relief of population density, and government officials also say they don't have any land plan. So how can the public have faith in the government and believe that they are trying to satisfy our needs? Hong Kong also has different types of land. In the NT, we have scrap yards, and some people have asked this can substitute for reclaimed land. In northern NT, we have large tracts of land that can where we can have comprehensive land planning. But have the government considered, after reclaiming land and we build on top, we'll create more waste? So this will become a vicious cycle. We'll continue to reclaim land. How are we going to break this cycle? Next. Insufficient land supply is an urgent problem, as post-80 dating creates a lot of anxiety, and I can't even consider getting married. So we have this serious problem now. Society has spent a lot of resources on education. As an educated person, I think we should have an in-depth examination of social economic issues and balance the different concerns, and we need to provide the most ideal solution for sustainable development. We shouldn't just object for objection's sake.
On the question of land supply, there is certainly not going to be a perfect solution. We need to come to a compromise and make choices. We need to bear the overall interests of Hong Kong in mind and have the courage to resolve the problem on hand. Therefore, I support the government's proposal to build artificial islands to resolve the problem of land shortage. In our mid-waters, they are no longer habitated by Chinese white dolphins. That is a fact. To build an artificial island in the middle of the sea will not have any adverse visual impact. It will not touch on the collective, memory of the local residents. So I think it's feasible, and I think those who are against, there wouldn't be many people who are against this proposal, except that those who support this proposal belong to the silent majority. For the unpopular facilities, such as homes for the elderly, rehab centers, they could be relocated to the artificial islands so that we can release land in the urban areas for residential and commercial development. We do not need to build a huge artificial island. We can build a few small ones so that the unpopular facilities, such as the waste treatment facilities, the correctional institutions, could be relocated to the artificial islands, so that people will not, so that we can relieve the shortage of land, improve air quality, and also like the Secretary said, the field materials that we now produce are already shipped to Taishan for reclamation. If we could make more effective use of the field materials, we can save money. So finally, I'd like to propose that the government should conduct a feasibility study as soon as possible, including the study on the impact on the ecology and so on and so forth, and try your best to minimize the adverse impact on the marine ecology and to allay the concerns of the public. Thank you. Mr. Lam Kah Hay. Thank you. Good afternoon. I was born in the 1990s. My request is a humble one. I hope in future I will be able to afford my own home and a job. So I support reclamation. All along, leveling our hills and reclamation were feasible methods of increased land supply. We've leveled most of the hills, but still space in the sea for us to reclaim. To the southeast of Qingyi and Malushe, the two areas which are not frequented by the dolphins, they are near the urban areas. They could be used to resolve the problem of land shortage. To respond to some of the other deputations, I think there are some misunderstandings. On the West Kowloon site, form out of reclamation. Other than the luxury apartments, there are also 20 blocks of HOS flats. Isn't there a solution to our housing problem? Furthermore, if we do not have population policy, and we don't need to resolve the problem of land shortage. So without a policy on food, does it mean that we don't have to eat? When we need to use the land in the NT, we have to evict the residents before we can use it for the redevelopment. For land under short-term tenancies, I think other than the plant nurseries and so on, there are also bus depots located there. Does it mean that we don't need to ride on buses? Should we evict all the tenants so that we don't go for reclamation and look after the dolphins? If we can't even resolve our own problems, how can we solve the problem affecting the dolphins? Next, we have Mr. Chung Kwok Fai from the Institute of Engineers Geotechnical Division. Good afternoon. I'm a professional geotechnical engineer and a member of the public. For the sustainable development of Hong Kong, the Institute of Engineers Geotechnical Division would like to support the proposal for reclamation and rock cavern development. If we do not do this, then in the near future there will be problems with our sustainable development. And most of the people in Hong Kong, especially our next generation, would suffer. And it would gravely affect Hong Kong development and the employment opportunities for our people. For all the infrastructural projects and development, they would inevitably have an impact on the environment and the people in the affected areas. To say that there are none, I would be a lie. The geotechnical engineers in Hong Kong will have more than a centuries of experience in reclamation. They have the technological know-how. We can resolve all the technical problems arising from reclamation and mitigate the impact. I think the biggest damage is the damage to the seabed and the impact on the fishery industry and the marine ecology. The geotechnical engineers can leverage on their expertise, so that when we build embankments and reclaim the sea, we will not touch on the silt on the seabed, because it's different from the past, because the silt will affect the safety of the embankment and result in uneven sedimentation. Regarding uneven sedimentation, for decades we have now developed very advanced technologies to control or to contain the sedimentation. Regarding the building of embankments, there is now no need to dredge. Take, for example, the artificial island for the Hong Kong-Macau-Zhuhai Bridge. We also adopted this method. Finally, when we reclaim from the sea, inevitably there would be some silt. Our engineers are now using nets to ensure that the minimal amount of silt will affect the sea, and there will also be environmental monitoring. And if we are found to be in breach of the standard, then we will make extra efforts to ensure that the water quality will comply with the standards. Next, Mr. Cheung Hao Wei, Council Member of the Construction Industry Council. Thank you, Chairman. I'm speaking on behalf of the Construction Industry Council. In Hong Kong, there is a serious, a very urgent need for increasing land supply. We also have the development of Commerce and Tourism Ministry will also require land for development. On that basis, we support the proposal in the paper. That is, we should explore different options to increase land supply for Hong Kong. The document put forward different options, and I think there are several which deserve to be explored further. In principle, we support these options or proposals. As we conduct studies into these possible methods or options, we should conduct traffic impact assessment studies and also study the impact on the environment, the ecology, and the residents in the vicinity. I think we can certainly conduct studies to find out the extent of the impact. Other than that, we suggest that we should use scientific methods to minimize such impact. For the projects involving reclamation near shore, we could perhaps consider doing so by building artificial bay in order to minimize the impact on the shoreline. For the proposal to build artificial islands in mid-waters, we suggest that while we conduct the feasibility study, we should also look at what is long-term demand for our port and for our container ports. And if there are such needs or demand, we should put them onto the artificial under the feasibility study for an artificial island in our mid-waters. Next, Mr. Jem Bon Chen from One Country, Two Systems Research Institute. We support the government's proposal to build up the land reserve, and that reserve can provide more residential sites so that we can improve the quality of life for the people of Hong Kong and to generate more land for economic development. A land reserve system can provide land to cater to our unexpected needs and also to avoid a scenario where other factors of production will be driven away from Hong Kong because of high land prices. There are various ways to help increase our land reserve, and of course all these options have their constraints. If we redevelop the old districts, we cannot generate a large amount of land, and the public may not understand that a site in an old area which has been left idle for a long time should be put into the land reserve. Next, for military sites, we are governed by the garrison law. The government cannot unilaterally change the land use for those sites. Our country parks are governed by the Country Parks Ordinance, and simply it's not possible for us to use those land. In the NT, there are some undeveloped land, and the titles to such land are rather scattered. There are also topographical constraints. Also, the size of these lots are also a constraint. Furthermore, the basic law protects the rights of the indigenous villagers and residents. Of all the options, reclamation can generate a larger amount of land, which is not affected by topography, and there is also no question of titles. Since reclamation takes a long time, I think the government should now consider, going for a proper amount of reclamation, and I think that is acceptable. We also have two suggestions. The land from out of reclamation should be used not only for the construction of residential units, it should also create sufficient employment opportunities for the residents in the area. The development of a new town, especially Tin Shui Wai, has given us a valuable experience that improper planning can resulted in people having to travel for a long time to work. Secondly, people really treasures the marine habitat, especially, and also the survival of the white dolphin. So I think we should step up cooperation with the Guangzhou authorities in order to better protect the ecology and environment in the Pearl River Delta region. Mr. Ambrose Kwong from Kwong Construction. Honorable members and today I'm speaking on behalf of the Kwong Construction Company. We have come this far in Hong Kong, and we should be proud of our achievements in Hong Kong. On the other hand, we shouldn't rest on our laurels. In the past, the government had, conducted reclamation and has brought prosperity to many districts like Tseung Kwan O, Sha Tin, Manch, and Man Shan. In these areas, more than 1 million people are now living there, and the land formed by reclamation have been put to use by the people of Hong Kong and the government. Regrettably, as many people pointed out just now, we've not had any new studies on reclamation for the past decade, and many of the long-term plans have been shelved. And this has really affected the long-term development of Hong Kong going forward. Another speaker has also mentioned that we cannot be complacent. So we really need to consider, come up with a more comprehensive plan and be more forward-looking. We've heard from people living in subdivided flats that they don't have decent housing, and from different media, we have heard and seen the grievances. Why can't we consider the needs of other people? Hong Kong nowadays is not like what it used to be. We don't have sufficient space. So where can people go to live? So the proposal to enhance land supply is absolutely necessary. The enhancement strategy and the six-pronged approach focusing on the economy and social development. For the majority of the stakeholders, I think we should work out the priorities, and we should start with the easier and then proceed to the more difficult options. And if we adopt this approach, I hope we'll be able to increase our land supply. After this meeting, I hope that we can start, we can build a better future for Hong Kong, and on this basis, provide a foundation for a better future for our next generation. Ms. Su Hong Pan, good afternoon. I was born in the 1990s. I'm concerned about the land situation in Hong Kong and our environment. The purpose of reclamation is to increase the supply of land and housing units to satisfy the needs from our population and to resolve the problem of people living in subdivided flats. However, is non-stop reclamation an ultimate solution to the problem? To tackle the housing problem, I think the root of the problem is our population policy. We must review our population policy. The problem that we're faced with, the problem that we have to address is reclamation. One of the solutions of the six approaches proposed, I don't think reclamation should be put on the top priority. We can consider first exploring the other options to increase housing supply. For example, revitalizing the industrial buildings and convert them to residential use, or for example, developing GIC sites as residential development. Changing the land use could be the first consideration, and reclamation should not be the first option that we should consider when we want to increase housing supply. And secondly, you cannot stop development, but then reclamation needs to be planned properly. In the course of planning, would the planning department have a holistic plan and consider the purpose of the reclamation and what development it would generate? Assuming that all reclamation projects are for the purpose of housing development, would we need to bear in mind or consider the plot ratio, the height restrictions, and so on? Other than using reclamation to develop housing supply and to consider the impact on the residents, we have to also consider how the land formed out of reclamation will be put to use and how it would affect the long-term development for the district. Regarding the choice of sites, we have to bear in mind the impact on the neighboring environment, and also regarding the choice of site for the incinerator. I think we should know. If we're going to have a housing development in an area, we have to ensure that the residents will not be affected by the pollution generated from the incinerator. So I hope that the representatives from the Development Bureau and the Planning Department will consider carefully the use to which the reclaimed land will be put to use. Ms. Winichi? I support the government's proposal for reclamation because our land, the shortage of land is an imminent problem that we need to resolve. But I also want the government to conduct a detailed EIA study when they choose the sites, potential site. And during the works period, you should come up with effective measures to protect the white dolphins or even the marine ecology. So we need to strike a proper balance we shouldn't be lopsided and say we shouldn't allow reclamation or we should not go 100% for conservation. I hope the government will be able to strike a good balance between the two.
The government should think through this very thoroughly. From site selection to construction, the government must think through it very thoroughly. Before actual reclamation, there must be a detailed plan, and the government must let the public see that it has a detailed plan. Then we'll be able to address our acute shortage of land. Thank you. Next, Professor Mi Kam, Professor, Institute of Future Cities, the Chinese University of Hong Kong, would like to share with you a few points. Land supply and reserve should be pegged to the economic and urban development of a city, and that should head towards a future vision. Therefore, the government is duty-bound to tell the public that this proposed reclamation and rock cavern development are to attain what objectives, and then what economic and land policies will there be to address public aspirations for housing and facilities. We conducted a study on land reserve and supply in relation to property prices or rental levels, and our discovery was that there's no correlation between them. For reclamation and rock cavern development, there must be an EIA with collaboration between experts and the public. So we must have collective wisdom before we can attain anything. Thirdly, after doing all these, if it is concluded that reclamation is to be carried out, then we should borrow experience from our not-so-happy experience in the past. We must adopt those reclamation methods with a lighter impact on our environment. Please refer to the document. In the past, the reclaimed land is separated from the original land by trunk roads. In future, reclaimed land should be connected with the original land. So if there is to be reclamation, the existing communities should duly participate in the process and should benefit from the merits. Fourthly, if you look at the planning work of the government in the past 10 odd years, the planning up to 2030 only covers reclamation at one point. And there it is said that without sufficient justifications, there shouldn't be reclamation outside Victoria Harbour. No more review were there after the year 2000. The sub-regional developments for NT, Northeast, Northwest, Southeast and Southwest have not been covered. Before we know what will happen in future, without sufficient planning, without sufficient materials and information, how can the government convince the public that we need to have reclamation outside Victoria Harbour and rock cavern development? Next, Mr. Wong-fat from the Students' Union of Department of Civil and Architectural Engineering, City University of Hong Kong. As students, we don't just worry about our studies, but also the future development of our society. The government now proposes to have reclamation outside Victoria Harbour and rock cavern development to increase our land supply. I absolutely support that proposal. But I'd like to offer some views. Hong Kong is a small place with a huge population. According to study results, the population will continue to grow. Housing is, of course, a problem. For the economy to develop well, you have to stabilize people's hearts. But now, we have insufficient supply of public housing, and private housing is unaffordable to the public. If you look at the consultation document, you'll see that there will be 600 to 730 hectares of reclaimed land, but only the 30 to 60 hectares of land in Ma Liu Shui will be used for public housing. That is only 1/20th or 1/30th of the total amount of reclaimed land. I'm not saying that logistics and other industries are not important. You will say that artificial islands can top up the deficiency. But then this is the first time we're to build man-made islands. The result may not be very satisfactory. Public utilities as well as transport facilities may be very costly. Given that all these projects will bring in private developers, we may ultimately see luxury housing only, and the fundamental housing needs of the people will not be addressed. There may also be environmental and ecological problems. In the vicinity of the proposed sites, we have the Chinese white dolphins and other ecologically conserved sites. Reclamation may only be a last resort, but we have to strike a balance between environment, housing needs, and conservation. Thank you. Next, Mr. Kelvin Lau from Students' Union of Department of Civil Engineering, the University of Hong Kong. Mr. Chairman, we need a land reserve, but we have to balance that with the other aspirations of the public. You see that most of the proposed sites are in the western waters of Hong Kong, in which a number of large-scale projects are underway, like the third runway and the Hong Kong-Macau-Zhuhai Bridge. EIA only applies to individual works projects. We may neglect the cumulative effect of these works on the environment. So there must be an overall EIA to cover the cumulative effect on the western waters. As for caverns, if Hong Kong wants to develop an underground city or create an underground space, then we should not just study the individual sites. We must have long-term planning for underground space. Why? In the pioneering project for rock cavern development, only obnoxious and public facilities will be moved to underground space. In future, there will be huge quantities of obnoxious facilities and public utilities into underground space. If that is to happen, the possibility of developing an underground network may be hampered, because in future there may be a lot of obnoxious facilities underground. We all know that if obnoxious facilities and public utilities are to be moved underground, it would impact on the underground space and environment. And a number of railways will be built in future, and the MTRC is actually the largest user of underground space. Maybe the MTRCL can move commercial complex or shopping malls into underground space, thus vacating more space for the public. Next, Mr. Chang Man Long from Students' Union of Engineering, Surveying, Hong Kong Institute of Vocational Education. Mr. Chairman, I personally support reclamation and rock cavern development. We are short of land, thus causing property prices to escalate. By reclamation and rock cavern development, we'll be able to obtain more land. Still, the amount will be limited, so there must be a comprehensive planning for land use. We must also have long-term planning to address the land shortage problem. As for environment, the government must analyze the environmental impacts. We must do away with traditional methods and use state-of-the-art technology to study environmental impact. Thank you. Next, Mr. Lam Kin Wing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To provide enhanced land is the core of the core duties of the government. To maintain a continuous supply of land is essential and necessary. As for the proposed Ma Liu Shui project, it's near the university and the science park, so it will meet the aspirations in the 2030 vision study. That is, knowledge will create facilities, and it can also provide new land for the neighboring Sha Tin. It can also provide land for railway infrastructure like the East Rail, the Ma-on Shan Rail, and the NCL. After relocating the Sha Tin sewage treatment works to a cavern, we'll have more space for development. And then there will be a synergy effect together with the Chinese University and the Science Park. Through urban design, we can retain social characteristics. Apart from residential flats, we can also have leisure facilities to meet the needs of the local communities. From another angle, the cost and time related to reclamation may be less than land resumption in urban areas. So that's a practicable and more expeditious plan. I hope that the government can act immediately. Don't drag this on. Next, Hong Kong Dolphin Conservation Society, Mr. Samuel Hong. Mr. Chairman, members, good afternoon. You all know that I study the Chinese white dolphins. You may think that the conservationists are only concerned about the environment and the Chinese white dolphins. In fact, we're also concerned about social issues like housing. We have very deep feelings about the comprehensive study on Lantau Island. I visit there very frequently because every week I go out to the sea to watch the Chinese white dolphins. So in the past 16 years, I've observed the changes in our environment and changes to Chinese white dolphins. I really regret what the director said. He said that we should change our reclamation policy in order to address the housing issue. What happened in the past decade? Castle Peak Bay reclamation, airport reclamation, Penny's Bay reclamation. We dumped mud and sludge in dumping sites, and now they want to reclaim land in Tung Chung West to address housing needs. For the Hong Kong-Macau-Zhuhai Bridge, an artificial island is being built. It's very near to Siu Wan. And then 16-kilometer long third runway, the incinerator, Siu Wan, Long Gu Tan, and Sunny Bay. I think the government is trying to break up all these projects to meet public concerns. But we conduct EIA, we know that the situation there is very dangerous. Have we got any comprehensive strategic EIA? How are we going to resolve conflicts? And what about the conflict between conservation and development? The number of white dolphins is dropping to a very crucial level. Now, the Chinese white dolphins are maggots for the handover. So we have to make a choice on Chinese white dolphins. The government must make a choice. Is it that all these projects are to proceed before we feel comfortable? We have to make a choice. It's difficult, but we have to understand that the public is more and more offended by reclamation. For Long May Beach, you can see that reclamation is irreversible. The government should study carefully public opinion from all sectors. The government must make a choice. Otherwise, we'll never have a win-win situation for environmental protection. Next, Ms. Megan Shi. Thank you. Hong Kong is in shortage of land. That is already a reality. By reclamation, it takes a long time before we can get the land. So we cannot say that we should wait till the shortage is very acute. That's too late. And for public housing and public facilities, I support them. At the same time, I'd like to see EIA well done, such that reclamation will not affect environment. Now we have more modern reclamation technology. Unlike old technology, the new technology will not affect the environment along the shore. Next, Mr. Choi Chong-kei. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In fact, Hong Kong's population is ever growing. So, relatively speaking, with effective use of land, if we do not create new land, particularly for domestic units, we'll have a shortage of domestic units. I agree that we should proceed with reclamation as soon as possible so as to increase land supply. Some environmentalists said that reclamation will affect the number of Chinese white dolphins. Well, I've read some data. Between 1995 and 1998, when the Chaklapkok Airport Island was being built, the number of Chinese white dolphins did not drop. And then upon the completion of the airport in July 1998, the number of Chinese white dolphins actually increased. That means if we grow more mangroves and build more artificial beaches after reclamation and address biodiversity, Chinese white dolphins may be attracted back. Well, after the completion of the Chaklapkok Airport, the number of white dolphins increased in the western waters. But then in 2003, when we had the SARS outbreak, their numbers dropped. After 2003, there's no reclamation in the western waters. Still, the Chinese white dolphins dropped in number. So apparently, there's no correlation between the two. At this moment, we're not sure about the habits of the dolphins. We don't know how reclamation will impact on ecology. So we should not blindly oppose reclamation. It's premature to put up an opposition. The government should study in detail reclamation projects, in particular, their impact on the ecology for the white dolphins. So we have to carry out a detailed study first. Next, Mr. Kwok Chung-man from Yat Tung社區網絡協會. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, the government launched 2 public engagement sessions. We participated in both. Please don't turn a consultation forum into a stakeholders forum. I think all participants knew that there are bogus consultation sessions only. Now, there are 2 groups of questions. Number 1 is common sense. 100 hectares of land to be reclaimed. How many metric tons of fills you need? Any direct correlation between the two? Chairman, in the central waters, 1,200 to 2,400 hectares of land are to be reclaimed. We conducted a number of experiments and failed. So, what is the difference between reclamation and artificial islands? What's the definition from the island? What sort of an island is the Abbott Island? Peng Chau, Kao Yi Chau, and Hailing Chau, if they are to be connected, what sort of an island will that be? Chairman, in the second engagement forum, there's a question from the participants. We asked in the first session. The chairman then gave a good answer, so we asked a supplementary question on a slip. Maybe I did not dress myself well or I looked ugly. The chairman did not address my supplementary question. I asked, reclamation will focus on the outlying islands. So why no public engagement forum was launched on the islands? Chairman, they did not tell me that there's no space, particularly in Tung Chung.
Chairman, we have a lot of supporters for reclamation. They claim that it can provide housing, relieve housing pressure. But out of this 5 sites, only Maliusui is slated for housing. We will not support it that easily. We are just creating a big landfill. We can dream up any scheme for the artificial island. The chief executive understands the principle, and he believes that caverns can be developed. Okay. Mr. David Loy from ACOM, Chairman, officials, I'm speaking on behalf of ACOM. We will support the government project. ACOM, as an industry participant, we are an engineering firm. We observed that over the last 40 years, we had assisted the government in infrastructure projects, new town projects. We participated in design and construction. The government policy will create a lot of job opportunities for the construction and consultant industry, and we also participate in this business. But this policy has breadth and depth. As an engineering consulting company, we feel we can participate in rational discussion. Developing land resources and a land bank have been an important element of government policy. Having sufficient land resources allows us to plan for the future. It allows for population growth, and we can also provide communal facilities and sustain economic development. Reclamation outside Victoria Harbour and cavern development can develop land resources and allows us to have a more comprehensive planning. We can also respond to society's needs, communal facilities. Taking cavern development as an example, we can relocate a lot of NIMBY facilities into caverns, and the opposition have concerns whether we can protect the maritime resources. But over the last 4 decades, I can say the industry has sufficient expertise to minimize the impact to marine ecology, and we can also enhance the shoreline. Hong Kong needs a long-term macro and forward-looking development policy. So reclamation outside Victoria Harbour and cavern development will meet the medium long-term needs. So our company will support this policy. Thank you, Chairman. Next, Ms. Wai-chuen. as a young person, I'd like to live in better living conditions, but the government says reclamation takes a lot of time. The land bank referred to will set aside some space for public housing. It will try to tackle subdivided flats, but it's only empty talk. So I have some doubts about this proposal. Even though the government says it's for long-term planning, but they don't have specific details. I agree Hong Kong needs development, but regarding these 5 sites, the government needs long-term planning. We need to look at social, economic, and environmental concerns. The government also says that it will use modern technology to improve the environment, but I question the cost. Will the government rule out these options because of cost considerations? So will we still have to endure the pollution? On the other hand, the government says the sites are too small, it can't be developed. But can they provide some figures? How small are these sites? Why can't they be developed? Well, some small facilities can be built. We don't need to reclaim a large tract of land, and therefore we can minimize the impact on the environment. So I'd like the government to do more explanation regarding these sites. They can instill more confidence in the public that it can be sustainably developed.
Reclamation proposals, in particular the reclamation site at Ma Liu Sui. I think there are many opportunities there. One, there is, especially at that location, it can be easily connected to the transportation infrastructure. For instance, the Sha Tin Central Link, which is under construction. It will also provide land for residential developments in the urban areas near the Sha Tin New Town. It will also create synergy with the proposed rock cavern development of the Sha Tin treatment works, and this will fully unleash the development potential in that area. Also, there are potentials to have developments within the nearby Hong Kong Science and Technology Park, and of course this will create job opportunities. And also I understand that the existing shoreline of the proposed reclamation area is artificial shoreline of low ecological value, and from that I do support this reclamation. I understand also there are concerns from the Ma On Shan residents on the odour and water quality, and government through that had implemented engineering measures to improve the sediment and odour problem. This was, I understand, through biological treatments, and this reduced or eliminated the odour, and also accelerated the decomposition of organic pollutants in the sediments. And also they carried out dredging, and not only did that remove the contaminated sediments, it also prevented flooding. And on the third thing they did was the artificial river engineering, which removed the serious sediment and odour problems. And so all that, the water quality of the Xinmin River had improved significantly. And so by understanding that government will address public concerns, and in carrying out the reclamation, continuing the engineering measures and continuing the water close monitoring of the water quality, I believe that reclamation is the way forward. So I do support the reclamation proposals. Thank you.
好，唔該晒。咁而家請下一位。
係請群風學會嘅許輝晴先生。
係主席。就頭。
Mr. Basil Hui from Range Study Center. A lot of speakers have raised a lot of points I'd like to summarize. In public housing, this is a controversial topic, and secondly, from reclamation, they can so reclamation, the artificial island, it's a habitat for the dolphins from southern Langtao to Potai Island. So if you reclaim in the middle, it will restrict their movement range. So this is, Thakongtin is a nationally protected species. Fourthly, we feel there's no urgency because you have not stated it clearly. You don't specify the location, whether it's one location or more locations. It doesn't resolve housing problems, or is it for a landfill? And I think it's a natural resource, so it's irreversible. You cannot restore it. It's like a prodigal son. He will squander all the family assets. So, second, the engineering industry say that it's very advanced, very modern, but we find that the engineering companies, they and the waters have been polluted for the last decade, and the fish species are endangered. Next, Mr. Chen Jipeng from Changzhou Environment Concern Group. I'd like to focus on 19th of May, Mr. Paul Chan had an essay, and he quoted a lot of statistics, examples, to convince us to support the government to reclaim land. Well, I will not question him. He used to be an accountant, but I'm interested in history because he quoted an example from Singapore, and we are competitors, but Singapore is a country state, Hong Kong is just a region, and Singapore had to seek independence from Malaysia, and it became a sovereign state. So so why would they have land? They have to reclaim. If they don't reclaim, they have no option. But Hong Kong is different. Hong Kong has heritage. We have an obligation to protect our resources for our future generation. We cannot squander it in 1 or 2 generations. We need to be responsible. We need to be responsible. I'm not sure if you recall a Hollywood movie, Indiana Jones, Chapter 1. He tried to snatch the tabernacle, and in the beginning, the tabernacle was still stored in a warehouse. So this artificial, will it be a Hong Kong version of the tabernacle? The purpose of creating artificial islands to solve housing problems, but it will create a catastrophic impact. Do not underestimate these warnings. Just having 4 walls is not a good environment. You need a place to relax. NT West, the outlying islands, are a popular vacation spot, and I dislike the government's policy of destroying first and building later. Next, Ms. Zhang Meng'a from Hong Kong University Student Union. I'd like to respond to an opinion that in the last decade the white dolphins figures had fell and there was had fallen, but there was no relation to construction projects. Well, in our western waters, if we reclaim land, it will shrink the dolphin's habitat, and I think that is an indisputable fact. So as environmental concern group member, we should not sacrifice economic development in favor of environmental issues. I'm from the grassroots, and I understand the desire for social mobility and improving one's lot. But before the government develops land, they should have a comprehensive plan. In this consultation, there is a 6-pronged approach. Just now, a gentleman said reclamation should not be placed first. When we reclaim land, that area of sea is irreversible. You cannot restore it to its original state. So I feel reclamation should be the last option. I understand that government is trying to create a land bank for future needs. It's like a deposit, savings deposit. But we're borrowing from nature. But when you borrow these resources, we don't know what its intention is for. We don't know how the government will develop what they have in mind. I understand this is a long-term project. This term of government may not be able to pledge how the land will be used, but the government has so many professionals on its team, so I think they should be able to balance everybody's interests. They can fully plan and come up with a sustainable plan. Thank you very much. Thank you. Next, Mr. Yatmeng. I object to Maliusori reclamation. First of all, it's not cost effective. The 30-60 hectare area is only 5 to 10% of the total plan. It's narrow, and unless they want to build windscreen buildings, otherwise it's not wide enough for planning. So what do I mean by reasonable planning? That is housing. Mr. Lui Gui-biu, in the consultation exercise, you had responded that it would not be used for high density residential. It also destroys the environment. Regarding Ma Liu Shui reclamation, the location is close to Chinese U, and this is a densely populated area and a mature area. The works will affect the water quality, and it will also create air pollution.
Seriously affecting the health of the residents and the teachers and students at CU. The natural scenery, like other natural resources, cannot be replaced once they are exhausted. Their value is that they can be for our aesthetic enjoyment. And if they can enjoy by a large number of people, its value is all the much bigger. The natural scenery and our ability to approach natural scenery, I think they should be protected. The natural scenery is for the enjoyment for all the people of Hong Kong, and that is the crucial point. It's very expensive to reclaim land from the sea, and the land obtained through reclamation, will it really benefit the majority of the people of Hong Kong? That's really doubtful. I therefore can understand why the government is proposing the Ma Liu Shui site for reclamation. To put it simply, before there is a clear-cut long-term policy, I am against this argument that we should go blindly for reclamation. Development is necessary. However, if the government cannot come up with clear answers, then I think we should shelve the development and have more discussion first, and encourage all the people of Hong Kong to participate in the discussion, so that eventually those who benefit will be the majority of the people of Hong Kong rather than a small number of vested interests. But all the deputations and individuals have now spoken. Now, if you brought along the text of your speeches, please put down your name on that text and hand it to our staff before you leave, so that our members can fully understand your views. And now it's time for members to ask questions. I note that we have Emily Lau, Mr. Chen Kao-lok, Ms. Chen Yun-han, Mr. Fan Kok-wai, and Dr. Kwok, who would like to speak. We have 5 members. If I may first propose that each member be given 4 minutes. We'll start with Ms. Emily Lau. Thank you, Chairman. Once again, I'd like to thank all the deputations for coming here on this Saturday afternoon and stay until past the hour of 6. But we've been here since 9 a.m. Today, actually. Regrettably, not everyone who has come support our secretary or the administration. But anyway, thank you very much for coming here to give us your views. Well, this is indeed a very controversial issue, and I'm sure the secretary will really have to think hard on how he should proceed. Chairman, before the last session, you asked the administration to provide further information. The One Country, Two System Research Center has actually, conducted such studies for the government, but Mr. Chen has left now. Well, I agree that the administration should conduct such a study, be it military side, be it land resumption or redevelopment. He feels that there are land available. What do we call those land? Land which has been built or developed already. I hope the administration will give us a more detailed list, including the sites for village houses. Many people are infuriated that these people have such special rights. Secretary, I hope you will resolve all these issues. If you look at the information provided by the One Country, Two System Research Center, Chairman, I have a question for Professor Ng from the Chinese University. He said that for the past 10 years, the administration has not conducted any review or study before they develop a land. Therefore, it's not in favor of going so, recklessly for reclamation before a detailed study is done. Professor Ng. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Lau, for putting this question to me. Shouldn't it be the Planning Department to answer this question? When I searched for information on the Internet, I had to, first of all, find out what the plan was. What I want to say is that when I look at the 2030 long-term development strategy for 2030, and if reclamation is an important part of that strategy, there should be a lot of coverage on this topic. When I look up the information, I could only find one area where reclamation was proposed. And the government said that unless there is a strong justification for reclamation within the harbour, of course we cannot reclaim within Victoria Harbour because of the protection of the harbour ordinance. I've heard from planners that the strategy will only be up to 2030, and that plan says that by 2030 there is no need for reclamation. But however, the reclamation that we're talking about will only take place after 2030. I think the government could perhaps confirm this or clarify this point. In the 1990s, when we had the metro plan, it also suggested reclamation, the purpose of which was to improve upon the environment in the old districts and to improve the living environment for the people. And because of that, we have reclamation at West Kowloon and also reclamation of both sides of Victoria Harbour. And the outcome was, well, as some people said, a lot of public housing and HOS flats have been built, but more we found was the screen buildings which have been built out of the reclaimed land. Before 2000, we had a review, and since then, we have not actually mentioned the review of the metro plan. So I hope we could have more information here. Recently, there's been a lot of debate about the development of the northeastern part of the NT. I was curious, so I searched the website, and I found out that for the northeast part of NT and the development strategy for the urban area, you go onto the website, you'll find that by 2030, the government has some planning brief for 2030, and if we need it, we can make inquiries, but there are no more details provided. Chairman, I hope that the administration will also respond to the professor. We'll ask the officials to respond in a while. Next, we have Mr. Chen Kalok. Chairman, I'd like to continue with the point that I made last time. We are talking in the abstract now because we don't yet have a population policy. We don't even have figures for the population projection. The long-term housing strategy discussion is still ongoing. There's still a lot of planning details that we don't know. We don't know, for example, we don't have the data regarding the environmental impact of these proposals. Of course, I respect all the deputations who say that they support the government because they want, to be able to acquire, a housing unit and so on and so forth. But then it would depend on. So you need all these things. It's not the case that I believe in Paul Chen and that's good enough. Because whatever you say, they take it that you support them. When the government handles public opinion, it's very interesting that if you support the government or you do not object, the government will still think that it will consider you to be in agreement. For those who say that I'm not entirely against reclamation, the government will regard you as one of the supporters. So I think we have to really clarify our position more clearly. With the remaining time, I'd like to ask Mr. Ka-Yiu to clarify one point. It was mentioned that there had not been a drop in the number of dolphins. Instead, the number has gone up. I'd like to ask you to tell us this, that based on your research. I think the dolphins will not speak on their behalf, so I'd like to ask the expert to clarify this point. Mr. Ng Hong, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me this opportunity. I was rather surprised to hear that when the airport was built, there was a drop in the number of dolphins, and subsequently the number went up again. And then since we've not had any reclamation, the number dropped again. So I think you might have gone to the ocean park too often. You think that dolphins can come and go at any time. Many people think that after development, the development of dolphins will come back. Well, we started our studies at the end of 1995, and the new airport was all more or less complete built already, and the number of dolphins was declining at the time. After the reclamation, and then there was a slight increase in number of dolphins upon the near the Brothers Islands. Over the last 10 years, because of more frequent more vessels coming to our waters and more dredging and so on, I think the capacity is becoming smaller and smaller. I think the environment was already damaged by the airport project, while the environment was recuperating. But we're now having the Hong Kong Macau dry bridge, and we have the artificial island. And then you have the road linking with Chelap Kor. So the artificial island is now already has caused a decline in the number of dolphins. If we're going to have more, reclamation at Tung Chung East, Tung Chung West, and the reclamation for the third runway, the Siu Ho Wan, and the Sunny Bay reclamation proposal, I think we will reach a tipping point, beyond which there will be no return. And we really doubt whether or not the dolphins will come back, and whether there will be room for the survival. If all these projects were to proceed, I hope you will not be too optimistic. There was a slight period where there was a slight recovery when the environment was able to recuperate, and there was a small increase in gold. But I think we have to really look into the longer term. Next, Ms. Chen Yun Han. First of all, I'd like to thank the deputations for coming, although there are some of you are for and others are against the government. During the fourth session, apparently there are more of you who are in support of the government. So I would like to have a dialogue with our guests. I don't want to say whether I support or the government or otherwise. We have to choose between pick the lesser of the less evil of the two. I've asked the government before that they should give us more detailed information before we would commit ourselves. Over the last 2 decades, I've been doing land planning. I was already involved in labor issues, and because I think the ecology has a lot of impact on employment opportunities. If you had a chance to go to the United States, the Angel Islands, near the Fisherman Wharf, when it is in season, you see hundreds of sea lions enjoying the sunshine there. I also like to hike at Lantau Island. Actually, my health recovered because of hiking in Lantau. I'm not 100% conservationist. We need all kinds of environment. Of course, housing need is important, but when it comes to the environment, I like to ask the deputations whether you are for or against the government. Mr. Choi talked about the dolphins. He said that some people said the number of dolphins has gone up, and you told us it's not the case.
I think
the government should study all the evidence and tell us whether or not there is indeed insufficient land. Take the airport. Many deputations agree that we could increase the plot ratio subject to a constraint. I always thought that if we don't have enough land for housing, there are many ways the government can tackle the problem. You don't need to redevelop the industrial buildings. There are many housing estates that you can consider. There are many options. You should exhaust all the possible solutions. Because once you damage the environment, you can't, it's irreversible. I'm a user. My health was able to recover because I was able to hike on Lantau. So my question is this. When I say I support the government or when I say I am against the government, have you considered the two? Especially for the students. I've heard the students of civil engineering supporting government's proposal. I'd like them to perhaps further clarify the position. Yes, I said earlier that I support the government's proposal for reclamation. I think the living environment and the living space is very important. But I don't think I think we'll be selfish if we say that we were against reclamation because our living environment is affected by RCPs and so on and so forth. But all these facilities exist before we move in. Are we selfish enough that we cannot accommodate these facilities? The on-time court residents, they are far away from the Ma Liu Shui and they are not even willing to accept the proposal for a new community there. I'm sorry, I hope I can have the opportunity to engage in a further dialogue with you. Yeah, I'd like to thank all the deputations for coming here to give us your views. I think all of us, including the officials, are really thinking very seriously about the future development of Hong Kong. Mr. Lam and Mr. So, who were born in the 1990s, I would say this to you, when you have more information on hand, you might come to a different conclusion. There are many things which you think that is the case may not necessarily be. I think Ms. Chen Yihan talked about San Francisco. I studied in San Francisco. For the last 20, 30 years, the scenery has not changed. They did not go for skyscraper development, but the economy still is very vibrant. They were able to develop the financial industry and the IT industry. It's not like Hong Kong where the entire cityscape would change over the course of 10 years and we keep destroying our environment. That's not the only option for development. If you look at our population policy and look at our population structure, you would, when you have all the facts, you probably would change your mind. Chairman, my question now is for the Bureau. They can prove that I'm right or wrong, but this is something that would affect our future discussion. Just 8 sets of figures. If the Bureau cannot give us the answers today, they will give them to us later. The government kept saying that for all residential sites available in Hong Kong, 400 hectares, 391.5 hectares to be exact. And there were 516 hectares of road, 1,200 hectares of village house development, 2,100 hectares of GIC site, open space, industrial sites. Fifthly, the OU sites without designated, for example, CDAs, 160 hectares, and sites on top of MTR stations. And also, according to the audit department, there were 2,000 odd hectares of land under short-term tenancy, military site 2,700 hectares, and also when we proposed to build residential units, actually the amount of farmland and land hoarded by private development in the form of land banks is 1,010.2 hectares. And finally, the so-called the Midland 800 hectares, and they overlap with the land bank owned by the 5 major developers. Together, we have more than 10,000 hectares. We only have 11,000 hectares of land in Hong Kong. Are these figures accurate? If they are accurate or close to reality, should the Bureau explain to us why we haven't fully made use of such land and still blindly, go for reclamation? Or do you have some technical consideration as to why such land could not be put to use, and what are the technical constraints there? For this patch of land, 10,000 hectares of land, 25 times more than the 400 hectares the government is now proposing to form. So why? Well, I think this is the reason why so many people object to the government proposal. I want the Bureau to tell me that the figures I quoted are inaccurate.
Next, Dr. Elizabeth Quat. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're now in the fourth session. I'd like to thank the deputations and individuals for offering us so much advice. I love sea very much, so I'm a diving instructor. So my time with marine organisms and the sea is much more than yours. When I went back to Hong Kong, the water underneath the sea was very muddy, and now things have improved tremendously. We have corals and a lot of marine organisms. So when we now say that we want to do reclamation, we have to be very careful and prudent. Many advanced cities experience tells us that marine ecology is very important. It gives pleasure, leisure, beautiful scenery, and even economic benefits to the city and even the country. And we must not neglect these merits. Now today we heard a lot of voices, some supportive, some in opposition. The government has to answer all their queries and opposition. At the end of the day, if the government is to ask us to vote on options, sufficient information must be given to us so that we can assess whether what we do is to the benefit and advantage of our younger generations. Today, it's difficult to say whether or not we should support the government. As a Sha Tin resident, I of course have to say that I love the Sha Tin Sea. So it's very difficult for me to support the government's proposal today. Ms. Chen Yun-han would like to hear the voices of the students. And Ms. Chen, which deputation would you like to hear? Well, because they said they support the government, so I'd like to listen to more details. Thank you. I personally think that we should establish a land reserve because land cannot be created overnight. But of course we have to conduct EIA and social impact assessment. But it is essential to have a land reserve. But I do not support blind reclamation. Or rather, reclamation in a blindly manner as proposed by the government. The government would like to have bigger sites for planning, but many studies reveal that in the urban areas we still have a lot of land sites, and even in the new territories there are deserted sites which have not yet been planned. So, apart from reclamation, we should examine whether or not there are ways and means to make use of deserted land in the urban areas. Land development does not just rely on one policy. We need to adopt a multi-pronged approach. Reclamation, rock cavern development may be some options, but to make use of existing land should also be looked into in the establishment of a land reserve. I would like to know which members would still like to ask questions. No more? As a LegCo member, I'd also like to say a few words. Today, we've heard from the attending deputations and individuals their views on government's proposal for reclamation. Whether or not LegCo should approve funding for those purposes, they also commented on. Now, I share some of their feelings. Now, many of them mentioned artificial islands. Concerning artificial islands, at the moment we don't have much information. Well, they are saying that roughly those will be the sites. I think the government is deliberately making it open. Apparently there's no framework yet, but some sites have been proposed. As for the area of the artificial islands, the government wants us to comment. Some deputations and individuals also mentioned the outlying islands. Another gentleman asked, how will the artificial islands be used? Are we going to move the container terminals there? Singapore has done that. So, a number of issues have to be considered. Our container terminals are operating. They're now in the urban areas, or perhaps in a new town, so to speak. The administration should look into that. If members don't have further comments or questions, I'll hand over the floor to the administration. The Bureau Director is here. Maybe 10 minutes for the time being. Concerning Professor Ng's remarks about planning, Professor Ng from the Chinese University, I'll defer to the Planning Department's colleagues first. Let me respond to Professor Ng's remarks. Indeed, from 1999 to around 2004, the Planning Department completed the Metro Plan and 4 consultation documents or sub-regional plans on the 4 NT regions. From the planning point of view, in the 1980s, the new territories was divided into 4 regions, and then we have the metro area. Well, that's a rough regionalization. Later, Hong Kong developed very rapidly. Overall speaking, Hong Kong has inter-district transport networks. So the geographical boundaries have been blurred. And then in 2007, Hong Kong completed the long-term planning study for 2030. And then the new territories was further divided into NT Northeast, NT Southeast, NT Northwest, and NT Southwest. In 2007, we worked out a plan for itinerant space. We've planned for the boundary as well as the new towns. That's to replace the rough division of the new territories into 4 sub-regions. As for the objectives for 2030, should we just place our objectives on 2030? When we conducted the strategic study on long-term planning for 2030, we made 2030 our ultimate goal. But of course, there are 2 foundations, 2 fundamental principles. At that time, we're of the view that if all projects were to proceed smoothly, then by 2030, Hong Kong would no longer need any new reclamation project in the Victoria Harbour. So the assumption then was that projects proceeded smoothly in Hong Shui Kiu, Kai Tak, etc. Then our needs in 2030 would be satisfied. However, the reality is that development projects have been lagging behind planning. As Professor Ng said, we've now obtained demographic statistics up to 2040. So we should estimate land demand for up to 2040 and do more long-term planning. Mr. Chairman, I now defer to Mr. Wai, the Permanent Secretary, to introduce artificial islands to you. Well, last time I mentioned artificial islands. Let me say something about our analysis. We looked at the 1,100 odd hectares of waters in Hong Kong to identify reclamation sites. In the eastern waters, generally speaking, the ecology is rather sensitive. The water is rather deep, and in winter is affected by the northeast monsoons. So for the time being, it's not suitable for reclamation. For the western waters, some guests mention a number of projects there at the moment. So in western waters, we could only identify offshore reclamation sites, 3 of them. When we selected these offshore reclamation sites, we carried out ecological studies and found the ecological values there not high. For Chinese white dolphins, according to a Guangdong Hong Kong study in 2011, Chinese white dolphins seldom have activities in shallow waters. We discovered that we got less information about Chinese white dolphins. But in past consultation forums, we did say that we would not proceed immediately with reclamation in shallow waters. So in May, we commissioned experts to survey the Chinese white dolphins, and that survey will last 6 months. Then we'll decide whether it's suitable for reclamation and where it should be. For the central waters, the ecological value is low. Shorelines with high ecological value are also few. We did not choose any site for reclamation there because there are major navigation channels and we have to do detailed study before we can identify suitable reclamation sites. So, in our consultation report this time, we do not directly mention any reclamation site in the central waters. We hope that after this consultation exercise, we'll be able to obtain more funding for detailed studies. In the next stage, we'll propose reclamation sites in the central waters, do public consultation, and analyze views. Secretary, concerning Mr. Gary Fan's figures, can I ask the Electoral Secretariat to pass those figures to us in writing so that we can prepare a written reply? Perhaps I can share with you something about certain issues. For example, the brownfields. We cannot look at them piece by piece. It's just like the Yuen Long South study. If you develop those sites separately, if there are no ancillary measures, you won't do it well. In the new territories, many of these sites are being used for storage or even manufacturing activities. So these brownfields will have to be rationally distributed. And then water supply, sewage treatment, etc. have to be considered in terms of long-term planning. So when commercial operations are involved, there are bound to be residents and villagers in them. So for NT South, relocation will be a problem. So brownfields will have to be considered. Yuen Long South is an example. Later, we'll publish the Stage 2 public engagement details for Hung Shui Kiu, and 200 hectares there are brownfields. So we would like to make use of those sites in a better manner. Then in these rural sites, people can live better, the industries can be distributed more rationally. You also mentioned 390 hectares of vacant residential sites. In fact, we don't have that much usable area. Now, all these information have been uploaded to our website. Once again, I'd like to thank so many deputations and members of the public for staying with us on a Saturday afternoon. Your views will be studied by us in detail. Members, any follow-up questions? No? Oh, Ms. Chen Yun-han. Mr. Chairman, so many deputations and individuals have given us so much materials and information today. Can I ask the Secretariat to collate the information so that we can follow up on them in the panel on development? Yes, we can do that. Now, we started at 9 a.m. this morning. We're 15 minutes from 7 o'clock. I think we should end our discussion here. I'd like to thank the government officials and the participating deputations and individuals. Any other business? Any other business, colleagues? If not, meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.